Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm your co-host, Dev Sodiger.
And I'm your other co-host, Hugh David. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at minute 37, although we'll be going back a little bit earlier, by a few seconds, because we want to focus on the scene where Martin Blank has met his friend Paul and agrees to go along with him to see what he does in his day job, which is selling real estate.
And joining us all this week is David Brook of Blueprint Review and DCB Productions. Welcome back, David.
Glad to be here. Yeah, it's a pleasure. As I mentioned last week, last episode, it's a favourite of mine, so I'm very happy to be here.
Fantastic.
So, in our prep for this minute, we've been doing a little bit of deep background on Terry Rostad's character. We get introduced to him here. He's not a huge part of the film, but he has some interesting moments, I think, and is played by Mr. Steve Pink, who is also a co-producer and writer on the movie. So it's quite an interesting little cameo, I think it's fair to say, for this film.
So he basically turns up as if you don't know American authorities and law enforcement agencies very well, as an overseas viewer, you might think he's a cop, and it's shot and played that way, but actually he's just a local rent-a-cop for the owners of the real estate or the neighborhood watch or something like that. But he's exactly that guy who at school has delusions of grandeur and is now getting to play them out by having a badge and a gun, even though there's no real authority in who he is and what he does. And we're about to see how that come to the fore in the way that he interacts with Paul and Martin.
Yeah, I've noticed. I've been to the States a few times. My mum's American, so I go over there.
Oh,
actually, from Michigan, and the family live in Michigan, so I've been to Michigan quite a bit. But you do get a lot of these kind of like I don't know what kind of housing community sort of thing.
Yeah, they're usually called gated communities.
Yeah,
because they'll often be fenced off and have a gate, and those will generally have this kind of private security.
I did go. There's somewhere near me actually that's got a similar thing. It's the first time I've seen it in the UK, and it really surprised me. I had to go there and meet someone, and they had that similar. I had to like buzz in and to go into the kind of a neighborhood. It was weird, but yeah, it is much more common over there.
Yeah. There's actually one. So, David, I don't think you realize I actually live in California.
Okay.
Despite the accent. So there's one just the other side of town from me, and I have some friends that live there. And being in California, it always makes me a little nervous because these communities generally only have one, maybe two ways in and out. So I'm always like, well, we live in fire country now, and I'm not entirely sure I'd want that few forms of egress in the case of an emergency. But they hold a huge appeal to a lot of people, and they're pretty widespread. So.
I think the thing we haven't got, we definitely have rent-a-cops here in the UK, but I think what's really scary is that the most famous company in the UK for the last 30 years, G4S, is also one of the most corrupt and have had the most problems and court cases and been sued a lot. And they now supply, unbeknownst to a lot of people I know, they have taken over a number of contracts related to policing matters in various counties. So actually, if you go to certain parts of England now, very small parts of it, it's just growing slightly, but you will go to a place where there's an actual police force, and there's people who will turn up in the same car as the police, but they're not actually the police, they're G4S, and their uniforms are ever so slightly different, ever so slightly tweaked. And it just, when I watch this now, I'm thinking, okay, all right, who are the guys who go for these kinds of jobs and get these jobs, and can we trust them?
We already have in the US full-on privatized police forces, right? Like there's a reason that the RoboCop plot goes the way it does, right? The concept of militarizing and militarizing and privatizing police forces is becoming a more real future for us. In the same way that army military is going the same way, right? Because you're basically just contracting out the work because
Yeah.
it feels cheaper to operate that way.
Yeah. It's not, but it
to
feels
what
that way.
long-term end, you know.
Oh, what a nightmare.
I actually find this character a little awkward, and not in the way that's intended, because he's obviously, you know, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and didn't do particularly well in school, as we find out, right? Like, you know, Martin has helped him through classes and archery, and you know, he's in this job because of the you know, short training period and the chance to get in to the day-to-day quickly. But at the same time, like, a lot of the dialogue has that same kind of snappy ring to it as everybody else's dialogue, and it just rings a little false to me. And
I kind of agree. It's we talked about this before starting recording. Actually, it's probably not one of probably the weakest scenes in the film, maybe. But at the same time, it still has some moments. I do kind of like what I like in this minute. I do kind of like the little moment, where Martin talks shop with Terry, and it feels like one of the few times when he can kind of talk to someone at a level about. He doesn't say what he does. Well, although in the film he often tells me what he does, but no one ever believes him. Or they just don't care. But he has this little moment of connection where he kind of talks about what he does. That's kind of a nice little touch. But I think overall, and I think where the scene goes probably in the next minute or so, I wasn't a big fan of, and it doesn't. It's a bit. Yeah, it's a bit of an odd moment that doesn't quite settle as nicely in the film as some of the rest of it. But so I know where you're coming from, but it's got moments there that I quite like.
It definitely does. Yeah, and I can see, you know, the character that they were writing for, you know, it makes total sense. You can see these kind of guys come out of high school, and this is the career path they follow, and you know, it's you know, you try to get through police academy or something and you drop out, or you just you know, you need the job but you don't want the training period, and you get to wear the uniform and be part of the club. It's it's a good character, and I think, you know, as you say, it gives Martin someone that he clearly had something of a soft spot for when he was in school, right? Like, he was willing to help the guy out, and then it gives him somebody that he can kind of relate to on a different level, which is it's a great point. You know, it really is. Like, these are two professionals in security, let's call it.
Although he ends up realizing that Terry's not quite as committed as he is.
No, exactly.
But at the beginning, he wants to try and
Yeah. This reminds me of something else that was in the 90s. There's an interesting inversion. There is a point in oh god, I can't even remember which season of NYPD Blue, where Dennis Franz's character Sipowicz, who's the aging Polish cop, who is the heart of the show, even though he's at the beginning of the series, at least, he's a racist, corrupt, drunk, also, you know, everything you think you don't want your cops to be. But there's a scene many years later where he's talking to his son by his ex, and his son's now old enough to think about joining the force, and they're standing on a corner in New York in the snow looking around, and they've just gone and actually helped deal with an issue that was happening outside the diner where they were meeting. And he basically says to his son, he says, this is a good job for people like us. We're immigrants, you know, our English isn't that great, but we can use a pencil and pen, and we can add a few numbers together, you know, and everything else we can learn. You know, this is a good job for us. And I remember thinking that's the most positive spin I have ever heard anyone put on that particular aspect of those services. Whereas this is the flip side of it. You know, this is the more cynical take on the same thing. You know, actually, this guy barely made it through high school without help. But and yet he's now the one walking around doing what he does. Although I love his description of I'm not a peace officer. We just execute homeowner policy.
Yeah,
that is such a great line. It's like, yeah, we don't laws, nah, policy. You know, and they do that with the house in the background, and you know, Paul busy trying to sell off property, and I guess the implication is this is gentrification ruining the neighborhood.
I think, there's a lot of this kind of subtext to the film, right? About the American dream, about capitalism, about, the emerging growing wealth divide, which at this point was significantly less pronounced than it is now, but, was the start of that trajectory, right? You've got a bunch of guys who all graduated from the same high school in the same year. You could argue had the same opportunities open to them, but you see very clearly that the outcomes were hugely different, and at times probably not really based on aptitude even, right? Simply, Martin is the American dream success story. He's the one that came from the dysfunctional family but actually made it. But with Debi especially, it's it's not that she's not made it, it's just she hasn't even had to try. And you see the kind of the gamut, as especially a bit later on when we get to the reunion, right? Like the folks that went and made it, as it were, even though, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, Martin's the only one to have really left town and to have gone out there, seemingly. So it's I think that narrative is kind of an interesting thread that runs through the story, and it plays on the Martin versus Dan Aykroyd relationship as well. Grosse relationship, right? Grosse has that very blue collar vibe. He's a jobbing sociopath that he's found something that he's good at and he does it, but he's not. It's not to an end. It's just what he does, and Martin clearly always is about like getting to that next step, chasing the American dream, as it were.
Yeah, and then the other part that's ironic is, of course, in any other like this is supposed to be Detroit, it's supposed to be in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. It's LA, but the irony of a white rent-a-cop stopping a white guy in a black suit and saying, "You look like I thought there might be trouble when I saw you." Right, and this is like what 6, 7 years, not even 6, 7 years after the LA riots. It's like, okay, all right, so a guy in a suit this is what that's what you've been told to look out for. This is very interesting. But the fact that this all happens with them stationary in the front while you get that attempted sale in the background is just such a beautiful foreground background kind of way of staging that, so that what you've just described is happening visually.
There's a nice little thing as well. I think it's just at the start of this minute where you hear Jeremy Piven's kind of BS that he gives trying to sell the house, talking about the Frank Lloyd Wright connection. Well, they suggest it in the end. He's like, oh yeah, that's what I like. So, I do like that kind of dodgy spiel.
I also love the fact that I think one of the things that I always find weird about American homes is for at least homes like this is the faux Tudor thing.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at
the
that
half
going,
timber.
I'm like, but then it's side by side with the kind of red brick that just does not fit the era, and I'm like, here in England, when we have that, it's because somebody literally built something in the Industrial Revolution era onto the Elizabethan era. Here, it's just like, mishmash, and they're like, this is such a great house. And I'm like, no. Design-wise, this is a mess, but we'll come back to... you be proud of that, guys. You've only had a couple of 100 years,
Hey, there's the whole McMansion style to embrace.
Is that what you call it? McMansions?
McMansion is a term. This, I don't think, is a particularly egregious example of a McMansion, but it's where the
fair enough.
Very, very expensive, often fairly modernist looking giant ugly houses get sprung up, especially if they're like gentrifying an existing neighborhood. I feel like this was a purpose built neighborhood that all these houses are fairly modern, contemporary. But it's a thing.
Absolutely. Okay. Anything else from this minute, guys, or should we call it a halt there?
I think let's call it there. I think we're
cool. Let's do it.
Good. I think the next minute is going to be horrific for us, but
okay. Well, we'll do our best.
Or for me, at least.
All right. This was minute 37 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio, 79.5 FM, featuring your co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, Dev Solagar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was David Brook. David, where can we find you?
Well, you can find my reviews and such at blueprintreview.co.uk. And you can, through the website, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter/X and all that kind of jazz.
Awesome. And you can also find us on Twitter/X, as well as YouTube and Spotify as @Debi Radio. You can find us on all good podcast players as Debi Radio 79.5 FM Grosse Pointe Blank minute. If you don't want to type all of that in, type some subset of the words in and you'll probably find us. And you can visit us on our website, which is debiradio.com. All of those, the Debi is spelt DEBI.
Finally, if you do want to come and find us on Facebook, there is a listeners group available. Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. That's Debi DEBI Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling of movement.